Well, welcome to another interview, Facebook Fiber Guild. And today we're going to have with us Michael Smith. And Michael's in Western Pennsylvania, so bring him on in a moment. As you know, the whole idea of the Facebook Fiber Guild is really to be able to educate people in the nature of lighting and particularly using of fibers. So we hope it's going to really be highly educational. I'm just going to, though, review very briefly where we were last time we met, which was we actually had Steve Juranics with us, and he showed us how to make some lighting using fiber optics, but for a actual sign. Yep. So there it is, the sign that actually I put together. I put one together, just backlit it with some fiber. I obviously put up Tavern. I don't know why I would do that, but and there it is on top of the building, and there it is. I reversed the color on it actually to make it a bit more interesting. So that's the sort of a project that you can easily do at home with the fibers. In my backdrop here, actually showing some of the scenery that Michael's put together. So let me bring Michael into the picture right now. Michael, welcome to joining us on the Fiber Guild.
Thanks for asking me to be a participant. I'm really looking forward to the evening.
Okay, thank you, Michael. But what I want to do is just introduce Michael a little bit. Michael lives in Western Pennsylvania. What town is it that you live in, Michael?
The town's name is Saxton. It's in Bedford County.
And not far from, we just went out to enjoy a bicycle ride there in a beautiful area of Pennsylvania. But I understand there's been used to be a lot more trains out there than there are today.
It's been 70 years since they ran on the trail that you rode your bicycle on.
Well, 70 years. Well, that's a bit of time. So, well, I know that people are really interested in sort of learning a bit about your history. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a presentation that Margaret's put together of some slides.
My love for model railroading began when I was very young. My father bought my brother and I a American Flyer train set in 1953. Being a baby boomer, we were still getting train sets like that. And the competition between Lionel and American Flyer, for some reason my dad preferred American Flyer. Shortly after, probably in 1954, the Huntington and Broad Top Mountain Railroad that was in the town of Saxton closed down. Most of the equipment was taken to a siding near Huntington, Pennsylvania, and scrapped, literally right on the siding. They tore up the rails as they left the communities in the Broad Top area. The East Broad Top, that many of you who have probably heard of, is the famous narrow gauge. We were on the west side. This was a standard gauge railroad called the Huntington and Broad Top. That's a photograph taken in 1953 with my brother sitting at the throttle and me in the background at this siding when they had assembled all the locomotives and all the other equipment for scrapping. My dad drove us down there, let us climb in the locomotive, and he took these pictures. The next picture is, again, my brother and I standing in front of locomotive number 34. This would have been in probably 1954. We were little guys, but big engines. And all the Huntington and Broad Top Railroad mountain engines were consolidations, with the exception of a American 440 they use for passenger service and a rare 10-wheeler. Only one of those locomotives still exists today, number 38, and it's, from what I hear, being restored somewhere in Blair County near the town of Claysburg.
Well, that's a great thing to hear, Michael.
Yes, the town literally grew up around the railroad. The railroad actually predates the founding of Saxton by about a year. The Broad Top area of Pennsylvania is known for the coal deposits, semi-bituminous coal, that became very popular, and the railroads that were built to deliver coal from the Broad Top and the mines in the Broad Top existed essentially for movement of coal. That also was the demise of the Huntington Broad Top, because when the coal mine began to close down, the changing over of coal to natural gas and petroleum, the mines closed down, and eventually the railroad did as well. There were three branches off the Huntington Broad Top that ran into communities. If you're familiar with the Broad Top: Dudley, Coaldale, Hopewell, and more than 100 individually owned mines that were served every day by the railroad. The community of Saxton, this is a photograph taken from a mountainside just to the east of Saxton. There's a large mountain appropriately named Saxton Mountain, and a rock outcropping that locally called Sunday Rock, I believe because people would hike there on Sunday just for something to do. But it offers an extremely nice panoramic view of the community. This would have been, again, about 1950. In the foreground, you will see part of the main line of the Huntington Broad Top Railroad. And to the right, upper right, is where the line would have come in, done the loop around. And then in the center of the photograph, there stood the roundhouse of the Huntington Broad Top Railroad. In the lower right-hand corner, just above the tracks, you will see a large number of buildings, and those are the shops that the railroad had, including a car shop, a machine shop, a foundry, paint shop. I remember them very well. Those stood probably until the 1980s. The roundhouse, I guess there's an enlargement coming that shows it a little plainer. This was built in 1900. Originally was 20 stalls, and apparently sometime around 1910, 1915, they began to have some problems with the roof, so they eliminated 6 stalls at the upper end of the roundhouse. So whenever I decided to model this, I used the last version of the roundhouse, which is 14 stalls. I actually set foot into that roundhouse many, many times. Across the street to your right is the 700 block of Main Street. You can see how close the buildings were to the roundhouse, and that the roundhouse literally was the focus of the community's attention. Those are the buildings that I decided to model. This is a later, much later photograph taken about 2004. I should have hiked up to Sunday Rock and taken another picture, but obviously in the center of the picture, the roundhouse is gone. It was torn down in 1958 when another part of the roof collapsed, and the space is now occupied by a market and a Dollar General. Of course, everyone has Dollar General, but Main Street has pretty much stayed the same as far as the buildings. What has been used, the use for the buildings has changed. All of them had some type of a business on the lower floor and residences on the upper floor. And the buildings were so unique that I decided I wanted to do a diorama that I could take to historical shows in the area and show people today what the Main Street looked like around 1945 to 1950, and also what the roundhouse looked like, because unless you're in your 60s, or I'm sorry, 70s now, you wouldn't have never seen the roundhouse. Saxton is a community of about 900 people. This photograph was probably a glass negative. It's amazing how clear the photograph is when you really look carefully at it. This was taken showing the 700 block of Main Street, looking east towards the mountain where the other photographs were taken from. And on the far right, you can barely catch a glimpse of the side of the roundhouse, which is made of native cut stone, again, built around 1900. The coal cars are extremely old, probably from the 1870s, 1880s. This photograph was probably taken around 1905, give or take a couple of years. As you look down Main Street, you will see all the buildings, I should say, are made of wood frame buildings. The closest one on the left is made of has clapboard siding. I'm sorry, board and batten siding, and all the remainder have clapboard siding. The unique part, and people have sometimes equated this to the Wild West, you could walk entire length of that street, which is about 900 feet long, and with a few exceptions in a rainstorm, you wouldn't get wet because all the buildings had overhanging porches that shielded people on the sidewalk from the rain. Of the 9 buildings that make up the 700 block of Main Street, 7 are still standing today. The one in the corner here on the far left is gone, and another one near the end of the street is also gone and has been replaced by another building. That photograph, by the way, was so clear that you could actually read the numbers on the cars. This is a photograph taken in 1938 from almost the same spot. Again, you can see the roundhouse looming in the background. And on the right-hand side in the foreground is a gas station restaurant that you can see the Gulf sign hanging there. It was owned by the Weaver family. It had a restaurant and then an attached garage, single-car garage that they use for repairs. Gas pumps were right out on the edge of the street. The street light you can see hanging right over the highway in the middle was how we illuminated the street at the time. Again, this is from 1938. The gas station is no longer there. It's been replaced by a bank, and the bank went out of business, and now it's a flower shop. Another view, one thing, this is a little later, maybe by 2 years, because now we have a traffic light, our only traffic light in the borough. Again, you can see how the buildings all have overhanging porches that, again, families lived in the second and third floor. Many of the buildings, the family who owned a business on the ground floor lived directly above it, didn't have far to go to work. The businesses ranged from a paint store, which was the one here on the immediate left with a stone foundation and the board and batten construction. The next one was a restaurant and newsstand that I spent many, many hours in. Then a department store, then a ladies' fashion store. Next was a combination. One side was a Clover Farm market, and the other half of that storefront was a bar. The next one was another combination. It had a barber shop and a shoe repair store that my grandfather and I spent hours in when I was growing up. The next one was a combination pharmacy and a millinery store. The millinery store was owned by a lady who sold basically ladies' accessories such as purses, scarves, hats, just paraphernalia like that. The next building was a Sportsman's bar. Yeah, plenty of bars on Main Street. And then the last building on the end of the street, which you can see on the next photo, right in the center, was another bar. So there was 3 bars on the Main Street and millinery store and so forth and so on. In the foreground with all the people standing on it, that's probably going to be one of my next projects. That was called the Chalfont Hotel. Again, I remember it before it was torn down. It had quite a reputation in its day. You can also see the roundhouse from this angle looking west. And take note of the electrical pole. They didn't even bother doing straight poles. They just put anything that held the wires. This again is probably from about 1910. I was privileged to have a copy, or actually not the copy, but the actual blueprint that the railroad had that they updated in 1923. And I had a brain cramp and labeled 600 block at 700 block. But again, you can see the plan of the railroad roundhouse. The shops would have been off to the right, and the leads coming into the roundhouse. It was a 90-foot turntable. So that really limited the number and rather the size of the locomotives they could house there. This scale, if you had the original scale, it would have been 1 inch was 100 feet. That's not the scale that you see now because it's been reduced. But it gave me all the information I needed when I built not only the 600 block or 700 block of Main Street, but also the roundhouse. It was easy to get dimensions because if you have the blueprints and then you have photographs, you can start that construction.
That was really great. What an opportunity, Michael, to have the combination of all those bits and pieces.
Well, finding things from 70, 80, 90, now almost 100 years is quite remarkable. And the fact that they still exist is even more remarkable. This is probably the one photograph that shows the relationship of the roundhouse in the community to that 700 block of Main Street, showing 7 of the 9 buildings. How close it was, and the building with the white or light colored roof directly behind the roundhouse was the one where the shoe repair store was. And my grandfather, who was a World War I veteran, and his buddies would hang out there every day he was not working. He worked at a power generating plant also located in Saxton. But we would literally walk across the street. He had a brother who worked for the railroad as a hostler in the roundhouse. If he was working, we would walk in and just walk around and look at all the stuff. That also gave me the bug to love trains. I remember the day that my grandfather took me over there. It was a day, I know it was in the month of April, and it was raining. I remember as if it was yesterday. And the engineer and the fireman said, we're taking the locomotive to the station, which again, it would be behind these buildings at about a 2-mile run. And he said, do you want to ride? And so my grandfather and I climbed into the locomotive. If OSHA would have known about that, oh my. Out onto the turntable and out the lead that you see down below where the sand house and the water tank is, and then the loop around the shops. And we got off at a bridge just below where my grandfather lived. We were filthy. And my grandmother almost threw a fit whenever we came into the house. She wouldn't even let us in until we stripped from all the coal dust. But it was quite an experience. I also had a chance to ride as a passenger to Huntingdon, Pennsylvania on the railroad. The conductor on the train shared the duplex house that my grandfather lived in. So he sort of babysat me all the way to Huntingdon. I got to Huntingdon. My mom and dad were waiting for me, and they said, you want to go home by car or by train? What do you think I did? Train, of course.
I was going to say, I couldn't guess, Michael.
No, you couldn't have guessed. This photograph actually just turned up about 6 months ago. A family had found it somewhere. It is an absolute gem, showing the organization of the roundhouse. Huntington Broadtop didn't have any coal stations. They literally had a crane. You can see just below the turntable where they would bring hopper cars or flat bottom gondolas into the siding there and unload them by crane. And that's how they loaded up the locomotives, but no coaling towers. This is my version of Main Street. It is at HO scale. And even in HO scale, that the diorama is a little bit more than 6 feet long. Instead of building the entire building, I decided to do the storefront and picked, I don't even know why, but I picked 18 feet of depth. So I think it came out to about 2.5 inches. So I put down a sheet of gator foam, and of course built the wood frame, and then put up a sheet of masonite behind it, and had a friend paint the backdrop. Then started building the houses. Now again, only the house on the far left, the building I should say, and the one that's next to last, going to the right, don't exist today. So those came from photographs, but I had the opportunity, of course, to literally go to these places with a 100-foot tape measure, 25-foot measures, photographs, and take all the pictures I want and get dimensions. But I also went back to archival photographs, trying to build these buildings as they would have appeared in around 1950. Not today, because it's changed dramatically in the usage. Only a few are occupied now with businesses. All of them are still occupied on the second and third floors by apartments and people living there, but it's changed quite a bit. Also had this, okay. Also built the gas pump island, and I have worked on the gas station would have sat there, but that had been just off to the front of the diorama, and the roundhouse would have been off to the right. I'm going to incorporate them all together, but that even the roundhouse itself I've built is on a 32 by 48 platform. Well, when I built the buildings, I really didn't know how to light them, and I was visiting the Great Model Train Show in Baltimore at Timonium, excuse me, several years ago. And there I met a guy named Michael Groves, who was demonstrating something called fiber optic lighting. And I was intrigued by it. I'm not I actually was a science teacher in high school, but electricity and electrical terminology was really not one of my strong points. I was more into earth science. And when it comes to doing electrical wiring and lighting, when you talk about wattage and resistors and capacitors, that stuff was just too much for me to comprehend. And when I saw this lamplighter and the fiber optic cable, that all you had was one light source, plug it in, and now all you do is run these fiber optic cables. That resonated with me, and I thought this is something this is the best way to light my buildings. And so what I did was lit the buildings. Each one of the buildings has a minimum of 6 fiber optic cables running to it, coming through the back. I used a suggestion that Michael made using coffee stirrers to go through the wall into the back of the building, and that would keep the fiber optic cable from curling. So you just have basically a straight shot, and only the end of the cable pokes out at the end of the soda straw. As far as the lights above the doors, those are plastruct tubing, very small tubing and I think I ran 0.5 millimeter fiber optic through that to represent a light above the door. I used 1.5 millimeter for the showroom or the store front, and then either probably 1 millimeter cable for the second and third or upper floors to eliminate, because I didn't want so much light. I tried to find online some background type photos that I glued to the back wall to illustrate the building use of the building. So this was called Dixon's Confectionery. It was a greasy spoon diner, and every Sunday my father and I would stop there to get the Sunday paper because we didn't get Sunday paper deliveries in Saxton. You'll also note between the two buildings, the one in the center and the one to the left, there's steps. This whole area actually slopes upward behind the main street, and so there are steps that lead to the back of the buildings or walkways. So these were stone foundations at ground level, and then it dug into the hill, and then they built the framework homes on the up above. I used northeastern scale lumber for the buildings themselves, clapboard siding or board and batten. This building was known as Cunningham Sportsman's Bar. Apparently it was damaged by a fire in the early 1940s and was torn down. I don't remember it at all. The only photograph I have that shows it actually shows pigs running in the street back probably around 1880, 1890.
That would be a very amusing picture.
It's quite a photograph. There was 2 pigs literally standing in the middle of Main Street. Some people at the front of the building on the sidewalk. The building here, all the porch railings are from Tichy. Almost all of the window castings are, again, from Tichy. And the building or the window dressings I got from City Classics, which makes some very nice assortments showing drapes or blinds. And that, again, that building no longer exists. This is called the Friendly Tavern. It was I don't remember what the name was initially, but again, it was a combination of a dining room on the left with the addition, and then the tavern. The bars then, I remember, had greenish tint to the windows. I think mainly so people couldn't stand and look in and see who there was drinking, unless you literally walked in. So what I did there is I found some rather inexpensive cellophane at the Dollar General that is used to like a divider in a notebook. And they had this translucent green that I cut and then glued to the back of the windows, giving the illusion of the greenish tint. Every one of these buildings on Main Street was very unique in a lot of ways. You note how the entry on the right is at an angle. And it was really fun building these things and trying to make it look like it did. The poles on the street, to get those, when I put the first level in, which would be the porch, I drilled pinholes, put a piece of copper rod in, glued it in, and then these poles are K&S metal, a very small diameter brass tubing that literally I could put up into that pin that I installed and glue that in so that these things are not actually glued at the very bottom on the sidewalk. They are just held together by the pin at the top of the post. This is a picture that was taken again in the 1950s, probably after the end of the railroad. And what it shows is a couple things. They were actually putting up Christmas lights at the time. This was taken by some family member, the scouts would help putting up Christmas lights. They crisscrossed across Main Street between the power poles, and they attached them to the front of the porches, actually, of those businesses. You can see the golf sign, and right behind the golf sign is the town fire siren. And the gas pumps, you can still say that they were like a visible type of gas pump with the big globes at the top. American pickers would have fun trying to find those. The golf sign was also had illumination at the very top. You can see the lamp at the top, or at least the lamp shade. And you can tell by the cars the time of the whenever this was. And in the background is that mountain again where the rock outcropping is, where all the other photographs were taken from. So I decided I was going to put the golf station in, and from Tichy I found the two visible gas pumps at a relatively reasonable cost, and decided I was going to illuminate them. And so I ran a 0.5 millimeter fiber optic up through the bottom of the visible gas pumps. All I had to do was drill one small hole in the bottom, and it ran right up through the center of it into the globe. So I thought it did a really nice job of illuminating the visible gas pumps. I also ran one up through the center of the pole to the top. The top I fashioned out of the top, essentially, of a push pin, a clear push pin. The sign I merely downloaded from internet, made a copy of it, and fashioned a sign out of a piece of plastic sheet, styrene sheet that I cut into a circle and used a brass pole to attach it to.
So that was a nice job of being able to get that those gas pumps lit up really nicely, and especially with the top as well. I'm just wondering, what do you think if you put a spotlight onto the sign itself? That could be hidden somewhere, just in the sort of the 45-degree angle maybe shining up onto the Gulf sign itself.
I thought about that, but if you look at the original photograph, I don't see any indication there was any lamps that were being on the sign. The only thing sign I saw was at the very top of the pole. That would be a good idea.
Yes,
sorry to try that someday.
Sorry to suggest something that's not authentic.
Yes. Well, I'm not exactly what you call a rivet counter when it comes to crafting things, but I do like to make things as close to what I wanted as they were. When you try to show your community, you don't doctor things up. For example, the colors I painted the buildings, you can see quite a variety of colors. That's the colors I remember the buildings being painted.
Wow, that's incredible.
My mind is somewhat faded on some of those things, but the paint for those buildings I bought at Walmart. They call that apple barrel. That's 50 cents for 2 ounces. And it's a water-based acrylic, and I put it on by hand brush because that's how they painted those buildings back in the day. So that's how I did it.
That's great. Now, of course, roundhouses are something that really attract our attention as model railroaders, and I'm really keen to see what you did with the roundhouse, particularly in terms of some lighting. So,
yeah, the roundhouse is still a work in progress. It's only been a work in progress now for about 5 years. I built this starting about 5 years ago, and I didn't realize what I was getting myself into. That and about $400 worth of materials, and I'm still working on it. I only know of one actual photograph that was taken inside the original roundhouse, and it showed clearly the style of beams that I have installed here. Those came from Plastruct. I don't even think Plastruct's in business anymore, but they were the only ones that were really long enough that would stretch I think it's 13 inches from the front to the back of the roundhouse itself. What I don't have done yet is a roof. And the reason is, first of all, it's a peaked roof that is curved. That is not easy to build. Secondly, I wanted a roof that I could remove because it's interesting to see what's inside. And if it's obstructed by a roof, then it sort of defeats the purpose of what I wanted to illustrate. I remember the inspection pits. I remember the piping, some of the piping, but this is my version of it that all scratch built, absolutely no instructions. And that's another reason it took so long. It's a work in progress. Wiring it was interesting. I did have electric lights that have since burned out. I haven't figured out why. And I have also installed what are simulated welder torches. I've also, of course, electrified all the track leads to if I ever want to run locomotives in and out of it. The turntable was a 90-foot Walthers, but the rest of it is scratch built except for the inspection pits, and those are from Pico. Michael and I were talking several weeks ago before we started into this presentation about doing lighting, and he suggested something he'd just come out with called Rafter Lighting. And so he sent me a couple of samples, and they are absolutely perfect for what I wanted to do to illuminate the roundhouse. And you can see them. He sent me 6, and I'm going to need a few more. I'm going to buy them short and soon. But you can see I decided to put one roughly in the center of the beam. I do know that back in the 1940s and 50s, that place wasn't exactly well lit. So I didn't have to go through many types of lights, and so brilliant that you need to wear sunglasses when you're in there in the middle of the night. That's what the rafter lights look like. I merely drilled a small hole through the end side of the beam and ran that up through and used the goo Walther's goo to put in place. if I had it to do over again, that nothing comes with instructions. I would probably have dropped that down just below the top of the upper part of the beam or the truss, because I would wanted to run the fiber optic cable along the edge of the beam rather than across the top. So what I did was I dropped it down a bit, and then I put in, you can barely see it, but I glued, again, black coffee stirs along the side, so that would keep the cable from arching downward or upward. So literally it would feed the cable through the coffee stir. I took Michael's advice on how to bend fiber optics with the boiling water, and did a 90-degree bend down into the lamp. The other end, where it goes down into the wall, I left that pretty much just on a natural curve, and then put another soda straw, or not soda straw, but coffee stir down into underneath the layout module rather, and then ran that to another box, light box or lamp lighter that I just bought. I like the effect, I really do. I know some people probably would find where the light shows up where the bends are distracting. Once you get a roof on, I don't think that'll actually add some illumination to it. I think Steve Jurassic mentioned about painting the strands if you didn't want the light coming through. It is what it is. But I really like the effect, and I'm glad I did it. This is just another view showing the lighting effect with the locomotive number 27 inside the roundhouse with the doors open. And this one is the photograph showing the simulated welder. That runs off of a 9-volt battery that I have attached to the side of the module, and a switch that actually have 2 of them there. So it looks like there's a crew working underneath the locomotive, which is a very nice effect.
Thanks a lot, Michael, for helping understand what you were doing, and let's bring you back in. This is how you're meant to have looked standing beside your presentation. I'm sorry that didn't work, but hey, that's technology sometimes for you. But that was really quite a work of art, and I guess really your issue is you're already halfway through the project, it seems, or so. And I'm looking forward to when I see how you're going to construct that roof. That's going to be quite a challenge.
Yeah, I've already built the trusses, the triangular shaped trusses. How to put them in so I can lift them off and all in one piece is going to be a challenge, and that's probably for next winter, whenever I'm confined to quarters because of the weather.
We all know that experience, Michael. So, Michael, thanks so much for joining us today. I'll let you go back to working on your roundhouse, but really fascinating history of the railroad there. We don't usually get that sort of an experience and sort of doing that full-orbed discussion of it. So really, really appreciate that, and I think our visitors will have enjoyed that too. So let me let you go, and thanks so much, Michael.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. So thanks again for joining us today. Obviously, we're at Tavern Enterprises. We enjoy working with fiber optics, but I must admit, I am amazed at the number of different applications, and Michael's just really been able to present some interesting applications there. So you can also obviously see us on the YouTube channel. This will be downloaded onto the YouTube, and then obviously, for those of you who are watching now, you're already on the Fiber Guild, but as this goes out to a broader group, it'd be great to have other people join us on the Fiber Guild. And I'd appreciate any feedback that I can get from you who've been watching today on what you saw that you really liked. Things you'd like to hear on interviews. We've got about 4 interviews lined up right now over the next couple of months, but maybe you can share with me what you'd like to see. So with that, let me finish, and thank you so much for watching us today.